The Planning and Zoning Committee meeting to order is Wednesday, October 23rd at 6 o'clock. In attendance, we have Councilwoman Love Ann Cloninger. So our first order of business is discussion regarding minor subdivision look back.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So, minor subdivisions, if you're probably familiar, the two of you are, the council added that to our plan development code back in 2019, and that sets a minor subdivision as 6 or fewer lots, and anything greater than that is a major subdivision. And the primary distinction is minor subdivision can be approved administratively by staff, and a major subdivision has to go onto the planning commission to be approved. So staff identified an issue that we raised to you all so that you could refer this item to the committee for further discussion. It's something we've run into repeatedly as an issue for subdividers, that they're unsure of when they can and can't do more minor subdivisions when they've already done some. So we do think that that needs to be ironed out for them in code where it's definitive if they can or cannot. So the language that we're talking about tonight is this underlined sentence here, where it says resultant lots of a minor subdivision, including the parent parcel, cannot be re-subdivided into another minor subdivision. So when a subdivider buys a piece of property, they might not know how recently that parcel was created by a minor subdivision, and so they come into our office and do some more cuts, create some more lots out of it, and they end up being told that they can't do that, and that's where some frustration might come in. So we're looking to implement that strategic plan goal where we have more clarity added to the code, so people can benefit from that clarity, both in terms of staff trying to implement it and developers or subdividers and property owners trying to figure out what they can do and what they can't do. So there is no defined period about how far back in time staff should be looking to determine if they can do another minor subdivision. It's just kind of left open. So that could be, a conservative interpretation could be that if it was ever subdivided, that you couldn't do it. Or a more liberal interpretation could be when the code was updated and everything was carried forward. So as a default, staff is operating under a 20-year time frame, because we have a similar provision for family exemptions, and that's the look back for that is 20 years. So staff's been using that by default, but it would be helpful to have something definitive in the code. So just to explain how this plays out, having multiple minor subdivisions. Here we have a large piece of property. This is out on Davis Farm Road. So if this were to come in and be developed all at once, this is what ideally you would want a design to look like. Not exactly this, but something like this, where all of the lots are accessed internally. We don't have a bunch of curb cuts and driveways all along an existing road, 49 and Davis Farm Road. So everything would be internal. And you would want to line it up with existing driveways opposite Davis Farm Road. So when you don't have a minor subdivision protection, what has ended up happening with this particular lot over time is, between 2018 and 2021, here they created 8 lots over this span of time. So you can see eventually they would just start cutting down all the way down, and you'd have 20 some odd driveways up and down Davis Farm Road with these long, skinny lots. So some of the potential options here, you could always consider having no change, where you would rely on our interpretation that there's a 20-year time frame, similar to family exemptions, or you could go for definitive clarity for property owners. And there's a couple of different time frames that you could choose from that are all within a scope of reason. So somewhere between 2 and 10 years is what is typical. I'll show you in the next slide how some other jurisdictions handle it. So if they handle it all, meaning they allow for minor subdivisions to stack on top of each other, they look at somewhere between 2 and 10 years. So you could add that, or you could tie it to a specific date. So you could say that you can't create any more minor subdivisions out of a lot that existed prior to October 21st, 2019, which is when council added minor subdivisions to the code. Or you could also say it was when the land development code was last substantively updated in March of 22. These are all within reason to add as a definitive date of when minor subdivisions can't continue on. Here's a look at what the other jurisdictions do. So you see here they have the different number of lots that they have as minor subdivisions. We're kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of the number of lots at 6. Some go as many as 10, some as 2. So there's a range there, and we fit squarely within that range. So there's a lot of jurisdictions that don't address a timeline about when you can have a cumulative minor subdivision. So that's kind of where we're at now. But others will say, well, you can add 1 new lot a year. Others would say you can have less than 3 lots over 10 years. So there's a range of how to treat this. So our suggestion would be arrive at something that is within the range, but as long as we're adding definition for subdividers and property owners about what their expectations of a property subdivision is.
And one thing I just want to encourage the committee is, a decision doesn't have to be made tonight. There can be a back and forth. If y'all have follow-up questions that staff can bring back to give more context for y'all, we don't want y'all to feel like you got to rush to a decision, but we want this to be a conversation, and the more deliberation and more staff can provide to help y'all, I think the better. Just so y'all know.
So, John, we'll go back to the map, Davis Farm. So in that example, you've got one big parcel, and then they broke it into 8 parcels, but so that's not a minor subdivision, though, right?
Yeah, because some of them started being created prior to that minor subdivision change.
Okay, so, and I think that's the issue, is that we just keep adding on, and it defeats the purpose of having the zoning in place at all. So why did this come up? Why has this come back up? Like, have there been particular issues?
Yeah, well, we constantly get pushback from property owners, and we have some that say, well, where does it say that I can't do a minor subdivision? So I think the code clearly states that, but we try to be reasonable when we've got an application come in, because they bought the property and they might not realize, well, it was subdivided 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, and that precludes them from subdividing further at all. And maybe they have a 20-acre piece of property, and they thought, well, my neighbor's got 1 acre, and the person on the other side of me's got an acre. Why can't I do that? So we run against that all the time.
At what point do the major subdivision requirements kick in? It's like,
Yeah.
you kind of have a choice when you start to build. Are you going to build 6, or are you going to build 10? And they have different I guess requirements. So if you're smart, you're going to go out and you're going to build 6, and then you're going to come back and want to build 6 more, and now you've got a major subdivision without any of the road requirements and that kind of thing. So.
Yep, that's exactly right, and that's why council created the minor subdivisions in the first place, and that's why that language was added, because developers are smart. They're going to look for every loophole they can find in code, and if that was left open, then they could just continue, and maybe they wait a year, however long it is, and then it starts to look more like that. So it's a measure of how long does council want people to wait if they want to create more lots on a minor subdivision, or do you want them to not do it at all? And there's some definition that you can add about how far back you want staff to look to accommodate more lots from a minor subdivision or not. Because right now, they've done the minor subdivision, they've used up all of what they can do by code now, but because it says cannot be resubdivided to another minor, what they could do and still be code compliant is make a major subdivision out of this piece and go through the planning commission process, keep all of the driveways off the existing roads. And that would be fine, that would be appropriate.
I would just think that, when they come in and they've got a parcel, and you're just gonna see a plan that's you've got a big parcel and you've got eight smaller parcels broken out on it. I think at that point, it's important to let them know they have an option. they can do a minor or they can do a major, and, I mean, you know, I'm probably the toughest one when I look at this, because I know what the end result is gonna be like and feel like for everybody, so, you know, in my opinion, I think it's done at that point. But it also maybe, you know, I don't know, a few years down the road, it maybe is determined by what else is around it, you know, if somebody else comes in. But I still think the requirements for the major subdivision is, I mean, you can't just forego that. That would be my thought.
I agree. I mean, where you could go in, well, I think that probably, I may be off base here, but is it because, if it's a family estate and then the original parents or grandparents or what all, you know, pass away and they give it to the kids and the kids want, you know, more of an investment in the land, is that where you're kind of coming from?
Excuse me, I'm gonna grab a drink
Okay.
of water.
I'll let you go.
Take the first
Here's that
pass.
question. So what do you think? What do you guys think?
I was gonna ask John, they do more with that than I do, so I was gonna.
Oh, okay.
No, that's more of the family exemption thing. What we've run into here is folks that buy a lot, like Jonathan said, that may be anywhere from 5 to 20 acres, and they maybe it was subdivided 10 years ago, and it's kind of in a more rural setting, and they want to split off 2 acres to give to their children, or let their daughter or husband or daughter or son or somebody build a house, and they want to keep 3 acres themselves, and that's where we've run into this issue before.
Let's say what we run into with conflict most often is folks that subdivide for a living. You know, they're not building new roads, they're not creating communities. They just buy larger pieces of property and cut them into. They add some lines, sell them to builders who build relatively larger homes that are more expensive. So those folks are out looking for land that they can subdivide, not necessarily create a community, create a road network, create a new subdivision. So that where it comes up most often is.
So it's
trying to-
developer driven. It's a
Yeah,
developer
so not
driven.
really family, like.
So there are some situations where families get wrapped up into the numbers as it gets subdivided over time. Or maybe, you know, a child inherits a piece of family property and they actually don't want to live there, so they're going to sell it to somebody. And they can make more money if there's more lots to sell.
Right, exactly.
So, I think we had a situation similar to this, I don't know if it was on Ridge or Little Mill in Lake Wiley, where the developer put the houses, they did a small development that, minor subdivision, where the houses faced the road, and then he came in behind it and did another development, so the end result was a lot more houses than he would have had, I think, if it was just a small subdivision.
Yeah, for that one in particular, I think they had a hard time based on the topography. Trying to get all of the driveways off of Riddle Mill. So that's why they went with that approach. They did as many lots as they could in the subdivision, get those approved administratively. Those can access Riddle Mill, but the larger major subdivision, which is the bulk of the development, they have to do the major subdivision process and keep all those internal. with new
But they
roads.
weren't like piano keys like that either.
Right,
They were,
exactly.
you know.
Yeah, so sort of how this played out, you know, they had a number of lots on the existing road, and then the rest they did as a major subdivision.
Can we go back to the list of what the other counties are doing, just
Sure.
real quick? I mean, I would be in favor of a longer timeline, only because it's, you know, if you're gonna do 2, you're gonna break it up and you're gonna, you know, shoot the gap and do one minor, come back and try to do a second minor. It's gonna take you, you know, a few years to get that first one completed,
Yeah.
then you've got 2 phases of a major subdivision without the roads and the the requirements there, so, I don't know, Jonathan, I think you're probably better equipped to advise us on this.
I mean, in terms of.
What do you think, like, what?
And-
Well, there's a trade-off to like everything else in zoning, and local government, really, there's a trade-off. So if you have a really long time, where you say in perpetuity, then folks that have property that might have been included in a minor subdivision previously, they just can never subdivide the land, they just have to live with it. They can develop it by right, or they can try to rezone it to something else, but that kind of locks them into that. So that's, you trade that off for, if it's too short of a time frame, then, you know, a subdivider can wait a couple of years to make some more profit. And then you end up with a piano key lot situation anyway. But if you have that period of time where they might have to wait, you know, say it's 10 years, that's probably too long to sit on that and wait to create 2, 3, 4 lots, right?
Does it make sense to have that as a special exception, so the neighboring people are able to weigh in on that?
Well, it's not a use, so subdividing is not a use.
Okay.
Yeah. So the use would be single family. So really, we're talking about the subdivision process, how you create the lots.
And then Jonathan, a number of the localities have no timeline on there. You know, what about the pros and cons to keeping that as it is, you know, as peers wide?
Yeah, it raises questions, and for the communities that don't have a timeline, I don't know for certain how they handle requests for cumulative minor subdivisions. It could be that they say you could just never do it, or maybe they have some unwritten policy internal that they have to wait a period of time, or they rely on the date of when their subdivision ordinance was created. I don't know for certain. But that's that trade-off is if you don't have certainty in the code, I buy property, and I think I can subdivide it, and I go to the planning office, and they say I can't, now I'm mad. And I've already invested my money into the property. But if I do my due diligence and I read the land development code ahead of time before I make a purchase, and it's clear on whether I can subdivide or not, then it's my fault that I didn't do my due diligence. And if I buy it and I go to the planning office, that's something.
Does it make sense for us to check and see what a couple of those counties do that might be similar to us?
Sure.
Why don't we do that and let that come back? I'd like the bump to,
Yeah.
you know, weigh in on this too.
For sure, because, okay, so back in the description, is there like, a couple of these have, like Charlotte Mecklenburg has 5 total acres. Is ours a total acre?
No acreage. Yeah.
And then
You can see
Clover
these
has got
to
10
be-
total acres.
I like to say, there's multiple ways to skin a cat, and
Here they
this is,
are.
this is certainly one of those, is everybody handles it just a little bit different from everybody else. So there are some things in zoning and land development that are kind of universal. This is not one of those. Everyone has to handle it somehow, but they all treat it a little bit differently.
So where that's got like down on the bottom, less than or equal to 4 lots, what, is that their minor subdivision, is that where their minor subdivision cuts off, is it 4 lots? I'm really surprised to see that. I would think from this that this is something that doesn't happen a lot, so maybe it's just, you know, we might be ahead of the game when we come up with a definition for no timeline, because it doesn't look like it's defined by many at all.
Yeah, one of the downsides of not having a definition is opens us up for legal challenge sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, if we make a decision based on, well, you know, you either never get to do a minor subdivision at all, or we say 20 years, and say, well, where's the state?
I mean, you could break it into like where we've got, is it 7, it's 6 or fewer. So you could break it into where you had, you know, you could do 3 in a time period and then an additional 3 in a time period up to a maximum or something like that. So, I mean, you would have to look at the situations and just have a better overall, you know, broader view of where these are happening and what they look like. But I would think you could do something like that too, to give people a little bit of relief, but then you're not really playing into the developers. You're not helping them so much, but you're not limiting them totally either. That would be my
So what, like, do you have like an average of total acreage that this is a problem? Like, is it on 10 acres that you have this come up,
Could be any acreage.
any acreage?
Because you might have
Any parcel.
RUD property and they can create 1 acre lots or even smaller
Yeah,
than
we've
that. They
seen-
might only do a couple at a time if they've got road frontage.
20-acre lots.
To begin with?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, we've seen it where someone's tried to divide like a 60-acre parcel into 3 20-acre lots, and it triggers it from minor to major.
Yeah.
Yeah, because maybe they started out with 1,000 acres, right?
Yeah, they just keep whittling it down.
It promotes a major subdivision.
That's right.
I think something that doesn't allow minor subdivisions to water down major subdivisions is, there's a kind of a line there, but I think, I just, I think when somebody comes in to do a minor subdivision, they have to be told, look, well, you've got an option right now. If you see them only doing half of it, you know they're gonna come back and wanna do something with the other half of it. So you have to say, well, maybe you wanna do something a little more major from the beginning, because you may be limited in, timeline or, what you can do. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't just make it easy breezy, personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, what some other jurisdictions do is they'll have a note requirement under their minor subdivision process where when we stamp the plat approved, it says this is a minor subdivision and no more lots can be created from these lots, something like
Mhm.
that. So that sets clear expectations. If I'm buying property and I look at the plat and I'm like, oh, well, shoot, it's right here on the plat. I'm not even gonna bother with this.
So what happens if let's say somebody buys a 100-acre lot and they divide that, they put, they do a minor subdivision, and those are larger lots, like maybe they've got 5-acre lots there. Are they able, because I'm thinking from that picture, we're talking about the other part of the parcel, but are we talking about they could also come back and subdivide what they've already subdivided? That's a whole different scenario.
Yeah, so you can create up to 6 lots from one parent parcel. So,
Okay.
how far back do we look to say parent parcel? Because in theory, you could look back 100 years, right? And there's,
Right.
probably a couple dozen parcels across the county. Then you get much more granular over time as we have all these subdivisions.
So go back to that picture one more time. I just want to be sure I totally understand. So let's say that those 8, which that's a minor subdivision now, technically, but not technically. Let's say that those are all 2-acre lots. And they decide they want to come in and carve out 6 more. They want to do a minor subdivision and divide those up. Is that a possibility?
They could not.
They could not do that, okay. All right. So they can only go down into that bottom part that's not been subdivided, is that right?
Well, let me correct that. They could not do that as another minor subdivision.
Okay.
So if they wanted to come in to the planning commission and say, okay, we've used up all our minor subdivision lots, well, we still want to create more, so we're going to go through the major subdivision process. So they've got to abide by all the requirements of a major subdivision, including road access.
Okay. Well, let's find out what maybe someone, other couple counties can tell us what's defined, how they define that timeline.
Well, I'm curious if we can speak to how, like this 20 years that we've sort of been using, like how that has been received and or worked out for us, like from the developer standpoint, and like how what we're already doing, like how that is working or not working. I'm just curious.
So right now, you're looking back 20 years.
Mhm.
I mean, to me, that sounds like a reasonable time. I mean, a lot has changed in 20 years. That sounds like a reasonable,
And I think that's where trying to figure out what these other communities are doing, because conceivably we've come up with that definition, right? Because it's based on the family exemptions, is what you've looked at. I think the question is, what's the benefit of saying, is that too long versus, and whose perspective are we looking to, right? When a customer comes in, are they surprised that it's 20 years? I don't know what y'all would say.
I don't know.
That's a good question.
And if we change that, what's the impact, and is it more helpful for somebody who's trying to do something with their land, right? But I think that's the questions I think about.
Yeah, and the trade-off is it meeting the intent of council's addition to the minor subdivision in the first place?
Right.
You know, is it effective, no matter what the date is, whether it's 20 years or 5 or 2 or in perpetuity? You know, is it effective in preventing PNOP lot development on existing county highways?
I mean, I think the county council I mean, a couple years ago, everybody was totally against these piano key lots. And that was what we were trying to avoid. You know, if you look at Neely Road, it's like Neely Store Road, it's all that.
Mhm.
And I think that's what was unwanted. So, you know, where you get all the curb cuts and people slowing down to turn off, and, you know, it might be great right now somewhere in an area like that, but 20 years, if you go forward 20 years, that's got more impact than we'd like for it to have, maybe. I don't know. We'll bring Bump in and make him the fall guy.
No.
We'll let him say what he
That's-
thinks.
we
So
get
we're
y'all
just
more
gonna-
information.
He's in that area.
Put this on hold. With that, until we get Bump's discussion on that. Okay, so the next item is the discussion regarding the TIA egress loss, LOS.
LOS, level of service.
I talk too much, so I'll let Diane take this one.
Thanks. So this one here, we've identified there was a problem for 2 things here. One is to be able to clarify this section here. Part of it is to be able to make it also to add a different standard to the egress movements. And that was brought to us by a traffic engineer saying that we need to maybe consider changing our egress movements. And so what we're doing is this section here for the approval criteria is going to be restructured to make it read a little bit better, as well as add a section there for the egress part of it.
What does it change? What's the change?
We'll get there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
there's
sorry.
multiple screens for that one. Yeah. So this one here is to kind of help us to address our strategic plan, goal 1F. And the potential options here are to restructure section for clarity, and then to consider reducing the LOS for site egress movements for new and existing developments. So the restructuring here is we're taking this section here was buried within this paragraph here. It's a simple minor, just bring them down here so we can highlight what those are. The big change here that I want to talk about mostly is this LOSE, and that is to be able to allow egress movements, we can talk about what that actually means, to go to a level of E and possibly an F, depending upon what you're doing there. Currently, egress would be considered a D. So whenever we get a TIA, we're looking at a couple of different things. We're looking at intersections, so how are the movements at the intersections? Depending on where they are, it needs to be either a C or a D. And we're also looking at egress, so that's actually like leaving a site. So how is the level of service when a car leaves an actual site? So let me get to a picture first so I can kind of show you what this means. So imagine here, this is 160, and we have a vacant site right here, and somebody wants to come in and develop it like this. And so the egress movement is when they are leaving, my thing's in the way. When they're actually leaving the site and making a turn on the 160. So right now, that would have to be a level of D, level of service. If we allow this to happen, they could go to a level of E. And some of the reasons for that, and I think I mentioned that, is to allow this to happen was because this is all what they consider internal delay. And this is delay happening within the development itself, not so much on the main road network. And so typically, TIAs look at how the main network is moving traffic. And so leaving the site itself, that becomes more of, if they can't move while they want to move, they might not visit that site. They might go somewhere else, not shop there during certain periods of time, not go to those businesses. And so a little bit more tolerance could be allowed when they're actually leaving the site. And that's why we would go to a level of E for that one there.
And in case it's not clear, level of service for traffic in your county is measured by the length of the delay at the movement. So how long you're sitting waiting in your car on average during peak times to make that specific movement.
And they go from A to F. And it's all based upon that delay time.
So your tolerance, as Diane was saying, your tolerance to wait to make that movement is probably more if you're leaving a site and you've already done your business than it is to wait at an intersection. And you're limiting that time, that level of service is only affecting all those folks that are just looking to leave, whereas at an intersection, that's impacting the flow of regional traffic.
And who asked for the change?
It's been a combination of, it was brought to us as we reviewed TIAs from different engineers, but also internally with staff. We've been talking about it ourselves. And so, because I think they made a point that other jurisdictions don't require that egress movement. They don't look at it. Lots of times DOT, they don't look at the egress because they're talking about mainline movement. And so because other communities, other areas weren't doing it, that's how it came to our attention, asking us why are we doing it. And so then we discussed it internally that maybe we could offer some amount of relief because once again, coming back to 160 here, it's going to be almost impossible to get to a level of D in some of these movements. Therefore, you would not be able to develop this site here into a nice mixed-use development because of that level of D requirement. And so it's plotted for major roads.
Right, and this is a good example of staff listening to customers with the potential that customers, are sharing their experiences in other localities and us trying to evaluate what that would look like here.
So are we talking about strictly developments, housing developments, retail developments, or intersections?
So this would be the egress movement is simply talking about, for the most part, it's going to be commercial. It's going to be new development coming in. They're going to be leaving that site. Occasionally you might have some residential, but for the most part, they're going to be a different movement. So we're looking at leaving a commercial development, typically.
So I guess the example that I would ask about to see if it falls into this same thing is, remember when Allison Creek Road was, when the development, Lakeside Glen was coming to Allison Creek Road, and because that intersection was going from even a C or D to an F, maybe they were required to put a light in at that. So
This would not apply to
It
that.
would not apply
That
to
is an
something like
intersection movement, not an
Okay.
egress. So
Okay.
imagine, like I said, this is actually leaving the site.
It would
and
be
not-
leaving Lakeside Glen in that instance.
Yeah, if they were leaving the
Onto Allison
development
Creek.
from Lakeside Glen onto Allison Creek, that's the egress movement for that one. And those typically are not going to be an issue. The biggest one is when, like I said, when you have these commercial projects coming in on major roads. It's difficult to get across a major road during peak times and maintain a level of D.
Particularly left movements.
Left movements are what's going to get them all the time.
Okay, and so you want it to go, what is it now?
It's a D,
A D?
yeah,
And what do you want it
to an E,
to, an E?
E, yeah, just one
And
level
what is the
up.
timeline? I mean, so I know when people,
I wish I printed out there's a chart that tells you what the different delays for that levels are,
Yeah.
A, B, C, and I can get an idea as to whether it goes from how many, it's in seconds. We're talking, it's just a second difference.
It's not minutes, like Bonham Road. was
No, this is
every
not-
car,
no,
when
these
two
are-
developments went in, every car was gonna have a 4-minute wait, and
No,
we do have a
it's-
4-minute wait.
The levels
Coming and
change
going.
between A and F are within seconds of each other.
But we can always follow up with that
We
later if
can.
y'all want
Yeah.
But that you're looking at right there is a commercial.
That's a potential commercial development.
Okay, does that have anything to do with, is there gonna be a stoplight out there?
There wouldn't be enough trips to be able to warrant stoplights. They would never get a stoplight there.
Okay,
There's
and,
only one in and out.
There's one, this is just an example of something that could happen, just for some vacant land. But in this case here, eventually maybe this would grow further down here and develop. We could get other connections to get to a stoplight. But if this was to come in first, we would have to stop it if we couldn't make that, we couldn't let that go forward if we couldn't make that left-hand turn.
and you're saying, would it be a right or a left?
In most cases, the one that's going to fail is going to be the left movement. But this would apply to both left or right or straight. It would be any kind of movement. And we look at the movements at every turn movement is examined.
Is this current, a
Um,
current development right there?
No, this one did happen to come through a few years ago for potential rezoning. They withdrew, so I remembered that one because we did have a difficult time getting this intersection here to work as a good example.
I mean, to me, that would be very difficult.
During
on
peak
160.
hours, it would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
I would have a problem
Yeah, just
with
about
it.
anything that would be new on 160 would be a challenge to get a
Yeah,
passing egress.
exactly.
Right, so therefore you wouldn't be able to develop anything on 160 because you could never get that egress out.
It's no different than a school line on a major road, school pickup line.
Yeah.
Everybody trying to get out.
Okay, so.
There's two parts to this one here, I'm gonna also
Oh,
come pretty
okay.
forward. There's also a time where if we have a development that's already been partially built, and they might need to go, and there's a couple of vacant parcels that when they come in, it's gonna push it to an F, is to allow, if it's an existing development, if they were doing in some out parcel construction, we allow them to go to a level F for that one. An example for that one here is also on 160, where you have a development mostly built out here, but there are a couple of parcels over here that might be coming in future for development. And this movement here, leaving the site, possibly could go to an F when these would be developed. But there's a limit though. It's not an F, just have at it. It's up to a no more than 25% delay decrease. And so that gives them, once again, a little bit more leeway into a development that already has some existing challenges. And so this development here wouldn't be able to finish out these vacant parcels because it's already failing. This would give a little bit more relief to be able to allow them to go ahead and finish out that development. And so we go to an F.
Is F as low as it goes?
It's as low as it goes. But once again, it's going to be an F that could go no more than 25% increase that delay. So if it's anything more than that, then it would not work. They have to figure out some other way to mitigate their issue.
I wonder, just in looking at that, I just wonder if DOT, if there are more accidents when something is in an F grade intersection like that, are there more accidents in that area than there would be if it was the D or E or whatever they commonly are?
There might be a correlation between accidents and level of service, because what you're doing is that's based upon the time it takes to delay. And so what can happen was they're tired of waiting, they might just go through. So that does happen. One thing that, something like this, maybe eventually they get a light. Once we get the traffic going through there, the warrants are there, something like that might draw itself to a light, a traffic
That's what I
signal.
would think. It's gonna have to happen.
It might.
Hopefully, if they get tired of waiting, they take a right and do a U.
And
That
go
would be
down-
my
they go
recommendation. to
down-
anybody
Yeah,
watching
that's
it.
They get hit, they can be viewed.
Yeah,
That's what
I mean,
I think I
happens
know
next.
where that is. I think
Yeah.
I've been there, sitting there.
Yeah, I'm a more.
And I do
cautious.
that.
You make the
I do go right, but most
Absolutely.
people go left.
I go right.
What's very
Yeah.
common, and they're very prevalent in South Carolina, is that middle lane, right? It's kind
Yeah,
of
oh, yeah.
suicide lane, whatever you want to call it. And DOT will call that a two-stage movement, where
They
you're
can
not
get-
going to
they
wait to
can
go
get
all the
it
way
there.
into your movement lane. You're going to go into that middle lane, wait until you have an opportunity, and then make your second movement.
There's a reason that's called the suicide lane too.
Yeah, not my favorite.
I'm envisioning several of them right now along Highway 49.
Okay, so what you want from us? What you think?
A recommendation.
What's your recommendation? Do you have a recommendation?
Those were the text changes recommendations that we were actually looking for. To restructure the section here, and then to allow the level of E for egress and the level of F.
And this is really just to start the conversation, so this sounds like something that council would be willing to accommodate to allow for some projects in areas that they otherwise wouldn't be able to develop, and maybe they would have an opportunity to say, well, the county's preventing me from developing my property at all, period. With the understanding that, sometimes you'll have longer queues than people are experiencing now to leave a site. So at least you wouldn't be impacting the regional traffic network, but, folks that are on a site itching to get back home or, go to the next meeting, the next thing, they might have to wait just a little bit longer with this type of change.
So what is the process to bring this to full council at this point? I mean, because I think this is
Could vote it favorably out of committee for council's consideration. Direct staff to generate a proposed ordinance consideration.
yeah, if it's something that you read out in your report to council, out of the committee.
Do I have a motion?
Well,
It's just you and me, Kim.
I would make a motion to approve it, but, you know, for you to write the ordinance and bring it to full council. I think there are gonna be different areas are gonna have different, opinions of this, and I feel like we are creating more impact in a way. I feel like we're loosening the reins a little bit, and we're creating more impact. At the same time, we are at a point where, you know, if we went back, you know, 10, 15 years, maybe things would be different. But now we've got, like you showed, the empty parcels where they can't be developed. Well, if you're in a commercial area and you can't develop a site, then that becomes an issue. Maybe we allow too much parking on the sites around it, and there, you know, get too many people in there. You get too many people in the movie theater, it's going to take longer to get out. But they're still going to go see the movie, and they'll stand in line to get into the movie, but they don't want to wait in line to get out. So, I mean, I don't know. So I just, I don't know, I feel like we are making way for more impact on people who are the customers of those businesses. But if not, then we have an impact on the businesses who aren't able to develop there. So it's kind of a catch-22, and I just think all of council probably needs to weigh in on this.
Yeah.
I mean, they ultimately do anyway, but I just feel like this is I don't take this lightly, I guess is
Yeah.
what I would say.
And I don't either.
Yeah, everything's a policy
So-
trade-off, yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so your our next discussion will be regarding tractor trailers on farms. And maybe that should be trailers instead of tractor trailers? I'm not sure. Okay.
So here's the motion by Mr. Atkins back in August. So really the background behind this is we received a complaint from a property owner about a property on a street that they were looking at over and over, that there were these trailers that were on the property. They're stacked up 6 or 7 deep, and they didn't think that was allowed, so they reached out. And a violation was issued, and so Mr. Atkins referenced this as, you know, we've got these restrictions on parking of tractor trailers and just the trailers themselves and RVs. So there's a list in the code of certain vehicles and how they're parked in certain districts. And so maybe that is too broad, and maybe there needs to be some allowances added for farms, because I think in this particular instance, they are using the trailers, not just the cab, but just the trailer component of it as storage for some of the crops that they were pulling up out of the ground, in addition to some of the barns and other things that they had on site. So maybe there's an opportunity to reevaluate that section of the code. And just for reference, that section of the code limiting parking of certain vehicles, it's been in existence in the code for quite some time. It was last significantly updated in 2016. So just to clarify where that's coming from. And I think that largely is trying to address property owners having these large vehicles, whether it's an RV, whether it's a truck that they're driving for work, or they're inviting people to park on their property for some small fee, whatever it might be. There's a proliferation of that across the county. So that section of the code helps address that. So that's a very common code enforcement issue, is there's a vacant piece of property and someone is looking to monetize it, not necessarily build on it, so they slap down some gravel, they invite truckers to come park on it without getting any approval, and it's not allowed.
We have that situation.
Yeah, that happens quite frequently.
And I think the unique thing about this is the farmer's using them to deliver eventually, so they're putting their goods in there that then go to like a Lowe's where you can buy hay and other stuff like that. And so as those companies run out, you know, they're cycling through the trailers. So this seemed like a unique opportunity, and I know Councilmember Atkins wanted the committee to consider if farms might have some flexibility. So that's what we're talking about.
I mean, I totally get his request on that, and I think that if somebody complains and the county goes out, I think it's obvious whether they are a trucking business or whether they're, storing their hay or straw in those. So I don't have a problem I don't have a problem with them doing that. As long as it doesn't, what you're talking about is where somebody is allowing a trucker to park there for a period of time, and that truck is on the road and it's parked because they need somewhere to park. And that, if somebody has 5-acre property or a property and they work for a trucking company themselves and they're coming and going, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with somebody's personal RV in their yard. But when they get to the point of they're renting a space in their yard, that to me is a little bit over the line. And they've then become the liability for the people who are legitimately parking a tractor trailer, for storage or, for their own personal, vehicle or,
Yeah, I think you've got that
I
exactly.
mean, we don't want to make it hard on a trucker. If he's a trucker and that's his life, that's his livelihood, then, he needs to be able to pull in his driveway, get out and go in and get back out the next morning and go. But, there's several, there are a lot of them that are, when you ride by and they've got eight of them out in their pasture, you know what's going on. And those aren't full of hay, they're campers and RVs and things. So.
That's right. Yeah, so here, the problem that we've identified here is exactly what you're mentioning, Councilwoman Love, is that, here's photos of the site that we're talking about. So you can imagine someone that's driving on the road, or maybe they live across the street, wherever the complaint originated from, this doesn't look great because it's otherwise a vacant property, and you can see how they might have an issue with that. So there is that, gray area, like what, we know what they're using them for at this point, but maybe that's not to the satisfaction of neighbors. So here's an aerial view, and so this is the area that those trucks, those trailers are parked. So it's part of a larger parcel. It's a very weird shaped parcel. So the actual farm is down in here, and the vast majority of that farming operation is actually across the county line into Chester County. So you can imagine if these trailers were maybe parked somewhere else, we wouldn't even have heard about it at all because no one would be looking at them. So it just happens to be where they're located. They're pretty high visibility. So these are some of the things that you could think about in potentially changing this section of the code. And the decision matrix here is, would you want to allow tractor trailer parking, whether it's just the trailer or it also includes the truck? If the answer is no, well, then you just leave the code as the way it is. But what I'm hearing is there's some interest in adding some flexibility in there. So then you're really talking about safeguards, trying to make sure that it doesn't hit that slippery slope where I've got 6 trucks and maybe I'm not doing a farm, but now I've got a trucking operation setting up, or I'm just leasing the space to whoever might park whatever there. So that safeguards that you might consider are requiring it to be a bona fide agricultural operation. Seeing other codes that use that language, that it's the vehicles are there for farming purposes and not for anything else. And another easy way to make sure that's the case is that the vehicles themselves are owned, leased, or rented by the property owner. Because then you're not having a situation where someone's paying to bring their vehicle onto the site. And some other things that you might think about including, if you were looking to add some flexibility, maybe having a screening requirement, so that if you do have them, and in your rural setting, and maybe not everyone else is doing a farming operation, maybe they've got some rural homesteads and they just want to sit up and have a nice view, maybe consider screening, or setbacks, kind of the same purpose, but distance-based rather than vegetation-based. You could also consider having a minimum acreage to allow these things. Some jurisdictions do that. And then certainly you could consider whether it's appropriate to have a maximum number. These are just things that you could consider.
Well, I think the top no and leave the probation in place is not right. So I would follow that down to yes, and then I would go to the potential safeguards and used in bona fide agricultural operation, because I don't think people really mind looking at that. I think that's part of, what rural area looks like, and then owned, leased, and rented by the property owner. And I don't think any of those other standards, I don't think this is a common thing, you know. I know we had one where they had parked all their, they had gotten a permit for, well, they had gotten not a permit, they had gotten the U-Haul business that set up out of the blue one day, and that was taken care of the next morning real quick. So I don't think the other things are, I don't see those as necessary things at this point, you know, if it becomes a problem. But it looks like there's one instance maybe that kind of triggered this, and I mean, I do think it's a good thing that that triggered it, but I don't see a need for the standards at this point in time.
So, do I have a motion?
Do I make a motion?
Sure.
Okay, so I make a motion that we allow for tractor-trailer parking with the particular safeguards mentioned. The use in a bona fide agricultural operation, owned, leased, rented by the property owner.
Okay, I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So let's go to our initiative here regarding our strategic plan and grow responsibly.
And so real quick before Jonathan jumps in, I want to share that this is exactly what the Economic Development Committee did before it went to workshop for the full council. So Jonathan is going to talk through kind of the potential themes of the planning goal. It's very similar to how Mitch did for the Economic Development Committee. I know you were there, Councilmember Mott, for that. So this is the precursor to then that will eventually go to the workshop, probably not November because that's parks, but December. So I just wanted to throw that out there before you start, Jonathan.
Sure. And you have the goal 4, grow responsibly goal. You've got that printed out in front of you. And as Josh mentioned, we're really trying to identify what the major themes are, because there's a lot of words here, and it's hard to try to encapsulate all of it. And it's a 3-year plan, right? So it's hard to think about it all at once.
Right.
So the 4 major themes here we identified that each of these initiatives is responsive to is refined codes, right, to make them more clear, make them more understandable, add some flexibility when that might be appropriate, keep council informed of changes that they're making and what the impact is there, and on the front end, what are some of the potential implications, as we just did tonight. You know, if you've got a change that you're considering, what are some of the pros, what are some of the cons, what are some of the decision paths that you can take, and some of the outcomes on changes. Stakeholder engagement is another piece of it, hearing directly from the community, directly from developers, in meetings, in settings where we're pulling out specific topics and what's working, what's not. Because a lot of times we'll hear, you know, I don't like that I can't do X, but we don't hear specifics. So if we get folks in a room, then we can pull the specifics out, and then we can start to address what the problems really are, right? Then these bottom 2 should look familiar because 2 of them come, those 2 come directly also from the economic development goal. So we really want to demonstrate that these 2 goals speak to each other and there's a lot of synergy. And just by the virtue of growth and development driving economic opportunities, both in terms of what people are building and bringing jobs, but all the housing that then follows the jobs and it stacks on top of each other, right, and keeps rolling. So stronger communities and sustainable growth come out of economic development as well. And we've met with our goal team. We're working directly with economic development staff to try to implement these initiatives. And a lot of what we're going to do is involving you all as a committee to get the work done. So we're not going to do anything in isolation. We're already not in isolation. We've got another major department that we're working with on these items, and it's going to involve the community. It's going to involve the stakeholders that are developers and property owners that are going to be affected by all of these projects and completing all these initiatives. But it also involves council, and that starts with you all as the Planning and Zoning Committee. And then we'll be bringing items, so just some examples of creating other committees or creating annual reports. We'll bring those to you to show you what those look like, frameworks of what establishing a brand new committee, ad hoc committee might look like, so that you have some input on the front end before we go do the task, and bring that for all of council to take a look at and sign off on. So these are some of the things that we're asking you all to think about in terms of prioritization. We won't have a survey for you to do tonight, but we will when this comes up in December. So council can give us some direction on how are you prioritizing these different themes, because they're very different, right? And prioritizing one, might have a direct impact on another, whether we're able to get to it quickly or fund it. All of those things are going to speak from the prioritization. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
So this is basically just the kind of an overall of what we'll talk about in the December.
In December. So November is going to be infrastructure and parks, and then December will be the last two.
Okay. So this is just to mull over.
Yeah, happy to take any initial feedback that you might have. I think that's part of why we're doing this, starting with committees.
Okay. Very good. Do you have any comment? Or not?
I can see the amount of work that's behind all of this, and it's I think it is definitely a more proactive approach to pretty much everything that the county does, and I think that's good. And there are things in it that I don't like, and there are things in it that other people might not like, and that we aren't all going to see everything the same way. One thing that concerns me, that has been a topic at several of the council meetings, is that things need to be consistent across the county, and I don't agree with that. I think we have very unique and different areas of the county. We sit down and we're talking about Fort Mill, and what's happening in Fort Mill, and then we're talking about whether somebody can have an 18-wheeler out on their filled with hay out on their farm. So I think we have to always remember to embrace everything that we
key farm areas.
in Fort Mill. In Fort Mill.
Yeah.
Well, if they had a tractor trailer sitting out there with something in it, they'd probably get a call. But I think we have to
And
embrace.
we haven't we?
I think we have to embrace the good things, and know that those differences are what make us unique. We could just be the same across the board, and then everything would be boring. We'd just be a boring county, and I don't think we are. So I appreciate the effort that y'all put in. I know I've
And
seen you
I
in a couple
like
of
it
different
that you're
things.
breaking it down into
bite size
bite size.
chunks.
Trying
Still,
to-
there's still,
I mean,
there's
I was
still chunks.
overwhelmed.
But they're-
I was
they're-
overwhelmed when I got that big old book.
I
and I was
know,
like,
we're trying to,
okay, we gotta do this all at one time.
it'll all come together. That's
Yeah,
the beautiful thing
yeah.
of it.
So I felt more at ease when you start breaking this down. Okay, so looks like we have a couple of other items for referral.
Yes, and these, we won't get into tremendous details. We're just asking you to refer this to your committee to discuss, similar to the other items that we've discussed tonight, in much more detail. And so these are things that are coming directly from our staff, and things that they've noticed that are causing problems. So Rachel, did you want to speak to these just briefly?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about the nonconformity section. We're wanting y'all to sort of give us permission to take a look at that and make some changes to bring back. One thing that we have noticed is, let's say, for example, you have a property that is zoned UD, and there already is an existing house there with a family living there. Because residential is not permitted in UD, you can't expand. You can't do anything that would expand that use. So, which is fine and great, but what if they'd like to put a shed to store some of their lawn equipment? And the answer is no. So we're running into these sort of issues. Same thing with like decks on townhomes in properties that might be zoned GC. I think we're seeing that. Nope, sorry, can't do it. And it just seems like such a,
Restraint.
yeah, such a small thing, and it's not fun having to tell someone no and not really having a whole lot of anything to back it up. So that's what we're looking to do. We've already been looking at that section of the code and sort of going through and identifying where there are some problems.
No, I feel like this is something where something can slip in, and I feel like this is a broad range topic right here. So like in the UD, we have asked everybody to rezone to a different zoning code. So when you're talking about UD, does that mean that we're gonna make an allowance for something that's not, or we're gonna let them remain UD, but we're gonna give them an allowance to do something within that, or are we still asking them to rezone?
I mean, I think that just that sort of depends. That's getting a little bit too into the weeds at this moment.
Okay. So I'd like to see the ordinance that you're looking at and give me a couple of examples. I'm happy to refer it back to the committee, but I'd like to have a couple of examples to give council when I do that, and just say,
Sure.
you know, and
This is wrong.
I would avoid that UD one, because I think we've made an effort to,
Okay.
council effort to rezone UD. So give us a couple of real life things that are.
Yeah, I think a fair way to summarize it is, the nonconformity section is, it's not super long, but it's not super short either.
Yeah.
And it identifies the different types of nonconformity, whether you're a nonconforming structure, nonconforming use, nonconforming accessory use,
Yeah.
nonconforming lot size. So it goes through those different things. And so the thought is, we keep running into these situations where a property owner has a nonconforming use, for example, and they can't do anything about it, and so they can't expand it, but it's already there.
Right.
So
So just
maybe there's an
give us
opportunity
give us some
to,
examples,
yeah,
and
have some
I guess,
allowances.
I mean, if you can email, I guess you can email that out to the committee. So, can you do that? And then we'll just.
Okay, next. Wall signs.
Yeah, and we've ran into some issues as well with wall signs and how we calculate like the number of signs that you are allowed. I think it says something to the effect of, you can only do one sign. Well, that becomes problematic in like a Harris Teeter type situation where there's also a pharmacy, or like a Walmart type situation, same thing with pharmacy or grocery. And really, it's what side should I park on? And so that's an issue that we have run into as well, where they might have enough square footage allowance, but because it says, just one sign, that only allows them to do just their one
What says
big
one sign? I know the Lake Riley overlay used to say one sign, but what says one sign now?
I'm trying to think.
There's a wall sign section of the
Yeah.
code.
A wall
Yeah.
sign section. So okay, so.
It's a table and it has, similar to the temporary signs, you remember the table that we had for
Right.
temporary signs?
Right.
Same setup, that it has the sign districts at the top and the number that are allowed in each of the sign districts.
Can you send us that? Just send us that.
And I think it's just
for
one.
walls, and it allows one sign.
One per
So you
wall.
can't- It's not like based on the square footage where you could break it down into multiple different signs, like
Okay.
Walmart and then pharmacy on one side and garden center on the other
So
side. It's just
has that
one
been the
sign.
problem?
Have you
for
seen the
larger-
U-Haul in Lake Riley? And the new fitness center? Have you seen how many signs they have? Oh my gosh, okay. I just didn't know that I thought we had left one sign per wall in the dust. So I'm interested in seeing that, just send that too, and then we'll, and if you give me,
Yeah, we'll bring some physical.
give me a current example and I'll
images.
refer that too.
That would be good.
I'll take some
Okay.
pictures.
So that's it on the items that you need. Okay, so, minutes of
I make a
August.
motion to approve the minutes from August the 20th, 2024 Planning and Zoning Committee meeting.
I second. All in favor? And do we have any matters for executive
No,
session?
ma'am.
Okay.
Okay.
So do I have a motion
You
to
do.
adjourn? I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I don't know.